They called her a queen, but history remembers her by another name, Juana the Mad. She was born a princess, daughter of Spain's most powerful rulers, yet her crown was not gold, but the stench of death itself. When her husband Philip died young, Juana's love turned into an obsession so deep that she refused to let him go, clinging to his rotting body for decades. What began as grief became legend, and what should have been mourning became madness. She ruled nothing, yet her name endures as the stinkiest queen of the Middle Ages, a woman broken by love and bound to decay. Juana was born in 1473, the daughter of Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon. She was not welcomed into the world as an ordinary child, but as a piece in a larger political game. From her first days, her future was shaped not by her own wishes, but by the ambitions of her powerful parents, who saw in her another chance to strengthen their dynasty. She was raised in a world where duty came before affection, and her identity was molded by the needs of her family and kingdom. From her first breath, Juana wasn't a child, she was a pawn. Every lesson she learned, every move she made, was meant to prepare her for a role she had not chosen. But the pawn soon entered a marriage that looked like triumph until it became tragedy. In 1496, Juana was married to Philip of Habsburg, better known as Philip the Handsome. The union was not built on love or choice but on politics. It was designed to bind the powerful kingdoms of Castile and Aragon with the rising Habsburg dynasty of Europe. To the outside world, it looked like a golden match, a marriage that promised stability and prestige. Philip's good looks earned him admiration everywhere he went, but his charm also carried danger. He was known for his weakness for women, and his unfaithful nature quickly became clear. Juana, with her passionate spirit and fiery temper, could not bear his wandering eyes. Jealousy became her constant companion, and their marriage turned into a storm of arguments, suspicions, and public scandals. The court whispered about her outbursts, and the image of the young queen began to twist in the eyes of nobles and servants alike. The court saw beauty and glamour. Juana saw betrayal behind every smile, and betrayal turned into an obsession that death itself could not cure. In 1506, tragedy struck when Philip the Handsome died suddenly at the age of only 28. His death shocked the court and left Spain unsettled, but no one was more shattered than Juana. For her, the loss was unbearable, and grief quickly twisted into something darker. While others prepared for the burial of a king, Juana refused to let go. She would not allow Philip to be placed in the ground, insisting that his body remain by her side. The coffin became more than a container of death. It was, to her, proof that he still belonged to her. Where others saw a coffin, Juana saw only a bed that still breathed love. Ministers, priests, and servants urged her to accept reality, but she resisted them all. In her mind, separation meant betrayal, and she clung to the lifeless body as if it still held the warmth of life. But keeping the body was only the beginning of a nightmare. Juana's refusal to bury Philip soon turned into a ritual that shocked the kingdom. She ordered that his coffin remain with her at all times and began traveling across Castile with the body. Wherever she went, the coffin went too, carried with solemnity as though the dead king still ruled beside her. At monasteries and churches, she demanded that the lid be lifted so she could look upon his face, ignoring the horror of those around her. Servants watched as she leaned close, speaking to him in whispers, sometimes pressing her lips against the lifeless skin as though trying to call him back. Priests and nobles tried to reason with her, but no words could break her determination. Each stop of the royal cortege spread whispers. Was Spain ruled by a widow or by a corpse? The people grew uneasy, and rumors followed her wherever she traveled. The stench of rot began to cling not just to her rooms, but to her identity. As the days turned into weeks, the odor of Philip's coffin began to dominate every place Juana stayed. Servants whispered that their clothes carried the smell even after they left her chambers. Courtiers complained of headaches and nausea, while priests burned incense and scattered herbs in a desperate attempt to cleanse the air. Vinegar was poured in corners, perfumes were sprayed on fabrics, yet nothing could hide the truth. The scent of decay was stronger than all their efforts, seeping into every corner until the rooms felt more like crypts than royal chambers. When the crown slipped from her head, decay replaced it. For Juana, however, this was not something to fear or escape. She leaned closer to the coffin, breathing in the foul air as though it were sacred. Where others felt sickness, she claimed to feel love. Yet Juana didn't recoil. She called the smell proof of eternal love. In 1509, Juana was taken to the convent palace of Tordesillas, where her family decided she would remain under guard. Officially, she was still queen, but in truth, she was a prisoner. The rooms given to her were kept in semi-darkness, with narrow windows closed and boarded to keep out light and wind. Air barely moved, and whatever smell entered soon became trapped. The coffin of Philip was placed nearby, and Juana insisted that its presence never leave her side. Servants and priests dreaded their duties, for the chambers felt less like royal apartments and more like a burial vault. For others it was confinement. For Juana, it was consecration. She did not see herself as abandoned, but as forever joined with her husband in a shrine of her own making. Over the years, she refused change, resisted order, and clung only to decay. Her rituals grew darker, her chambers more unlivable. Juana's life in Tordesillas quickly revolved around rituals that only deepened her decline. Each day she demanded that Philip's coffin be opened so she could look upon his face, no matter how much it had changed. She would sit beside the body for hours, speaking to it softly, as if expecting answers, and sometimes placing her hand on the cold flesh as though to feel a pulse that no longer existed. At night, muffled whispers were heard through the walls, Juana's voice carrying conversations with a husband who could not reply. Servants tried to ease the horror by burning herbs, scattering ashes, and filling the rooms with perfumes, yet the smell of death was permanent and unshakable. Her devotion turned into a grotesque mass where the altar was rot itself. To Juana, this was faith and loyalty. To others, it was proof that madness had claimed her. And in this decaying chapel of love, her children began to suffer. Juana's madness did not only consume her, it also cast a shadow over her children. Her young daughter Catherine was forced to stay with her for years, growing up in the same rooms filled with decay and fear. Witnesses said the child cried constantly, terrified of the nightly whispers her mother spoke to the coffin. Juana's sons, who hoped to bring dignity back to their father's memory, begged her to allow a proper burial. Instead of listening, she flew into fits of rage, accusing them of betrayal. She shouted that they wanted to steal Philip's soul, and in her fury, she treated her own children as enemies. Even heirs of Spain feared their mother more than their enemies. But Juana's obsession was stronger than family, stronger than crown. As the years passed, Juana's behavior turned from private sorrow into public legend. Peasants whispered that she lay beside Philip's corpse at night, claiming she had made a pact with the devil to keep him near. Monks declared that her madness was a punishment from God, a warning to others who defied his will. Her image in the eyes of the people was no longer that of a queen but of a haunted figure trapped in sin and shadow. Spain did not see a queen. It saw a curse walking in velvet. Tales of her madness spread far beyond Castile, growing darker with each telling, until Juana herself became less a woman and more a myth. And still the decades dragged on, suffocating in stench. Juana's confinement in Tordesillas stretched not for months or years, but for more than 4 decades. In that long imprisonment, daily life became a cycle of neglect and decay. Sheets on her bed were left unchanged until they fell apart with filth. Vessels of waste were not carried out until they overflowed, and the water she drank from sat stagnant for weeks. The air was so thick with rot that servants carried herbs under their clothes, yet nothing could ease the foulness that clung to the walls and to their skin. Over time, what once horrified the court became routine, and the stench turned into a permanent part of existence. For Juana, time was not measured by seasons, but by candles and smell. Each day blended into the next, a haze of darkness and decay that never lifted. But even decay has an end, though hers came too late. In 1555, after nearly half a century locked away in Tordesillas, Juana finally died. By then, she was an old woman whose world had shrunk to shadows, silence, and the constant presence of her husband's coffin. When her body was removed, inspectors and attendants found her chambers almost impossible to enter. The smell of decades of rot, filth, and neglect clung to the walls and floors, seeping into the very stones of the palace. Even her death could not air out the decades of rot. Servants spoke of the stench that followed them even after they left the rooms, as if Juana's presence still lingered in the air. Yet her story did not end in her grave. Long after Juana's death, debate has never ceased over who she truly was. Some historians believe she suffered from mental illness, a queen trapped by her own broken mind. Others argue that her confinement served a political purpose, allowing her father, her son, and later her grandson to rule in her name while she was silenced. Whatever the truth, the image that survived was not of a ruler or a mother, but of a woman bound to a coffin and a smell. She was remembered not for policies or battles, but for madness and decay. In stories told across Spain and beyond, she became Juana la Loca, the queen whose crown was stench. She ruled nothing, yet her odor ruled memory itself. Centuries later, her life still lingers as both warning and mystery. Her tragedy asks, where does grief end and madness begin?